So today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to read the first chapter from my book, which is called Letter VII, Oliver Cowdery's Message to the World about the Hill Cumorah. And I'm going to read this chapter because I think a lot of people haven't read it before. It's actually in the second edition of the book. This is what the book looks like. So you can see Letter VII. It's got a picture of the Hill Cumorah on it. And we're just going to read the first chapter and see what you think. Starts off by saying, the Cumorah controversy. Many members of the church are surprised to learn there is a controversy about the location of the Hill Cumorah. Most of us think it is in New York, a few miles south of Palmyra. It's obvious, right? Joseph got the plates there. The Jaredites and the Nephites died there. How could the Hill Cumorah not be in New York? Believe it or not, most Book of Mormon scholars say the Hill Cumorah is not in New York. They insist the Hill Cumorah is in Central America. I'm serious. When they learn what these scholars teach, many LDS people become confused. Maybe you are too. If Moroni buried the plates in New York, how could Cumorah be in Central America? The scholars have an explanation. They call it the two Cumorah theory. In 1936, when LDS scholars first began accepting the two Cumorah theory, Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith warned the saints. Because of his theory, he wrote, some members of the church have become confused and greatly disturbed in their faith in the Book of Mormon. 20 years later, as president of the Quorum of the 12, President Smith repeated the warning in his book, Doctrines of Salvation. The fact that the two Cumorah theory became the consensus among LDS scholars and educators is the reason everyone in the church needs to read Letter VII. Again, this is Letter VII. I want to clarify at the outset that I have great respect for LDS scholars and educators, including those who focus on the Book of Mormon. They are faithful members of the church. They work hard and follow accepted academic principles and practices. I'm not criticizing them personally or accusing them of anything untoward. In fact, on its face, the two Cumorah theory is not irrational. It is a product of careful analysis of the Book of Mormon text. But as we'll see, it has a major devastating flaw. It rejects Letter VII. When Joseph Smith was alive, everyone knew that Cumorah was in New York. Letter VII was part of the first detailed church history. Letter VII, written in 1835 by Oliver Cowdery with Joseph's assistance, declares unambiguously that the final battles of the Nephites and Jaredites took place in the mile-wide valley west of the Hill Cumorah in New York. Now look at the front and back cover. Can you see that? This is the valley that Oliver wrote about, with the Hill Cumorah on the right. Hill Cumorah is over here. I took this photo with my drone in 2015. Oliver wrote, about 1 mile west of Cumorah rises another ridge of less height, running parallel with the former, leaving a beautiful vale between. When one reflects on the fact that here, between these hills, the entire power of the national strength of both the Jaredites and the Nephites were destroyed. There is no ambiguity, hesitation, or speculation here. Oliver declares that, in fact, the New York Cumorah is the site of the final battles. Letter VII was published in 3 church newspapers in 1835 to 1841. Joseph included it in his own journal. It was included in missionary pamphlets. No one questioned the New York setting. So, how did we end up with the two Cumorah theory that has become the consensus among LDS scholars and educators? Joseph Smith limited his own comments to North America. Everything that can be directly linked to him supports the North American setting. Nothing that supports a setting outside North America can be directly linked to him. However, other Mormon scholars cited evidence of destroyed civilizations in North, Central, and South America as proof of the Book of Mormon. Most notoriously, anonymous articles published in the 1842 Times and Seasons claimed that Mayan ruins were left by the Nephites and that Zarahemla was in Guatemala. Early Mormon authors, but not Joseph Smith, claimed that Lehi landed in Chile, the Lamanites inhabited South America, Panama was a narrow neck of land, and the Nephites inhabited North America. Based on that assumption, placing Zarahemla in Guatemala was plausible. The 1879 edition of the Book of Mormon included footnotes about geography that stated clearly that Cumorah was in New York. Beginning in the 1920s, though, scholars from the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints adopted a, quote, limited geography, close quote, theory that placed Book of Mormon events in Central America, or Mesoamerica. They calculated that the events in the Promised Land took place within about an 800-mile radius of locations in Central America. The hill in New York, 2,400 miles from Guatemala, was considered too far away to be the Book of Mormon Cumorah. That's a reasonable conclusion, actually. The limited geography concept was soon embraced by LDS scholars. By the 1980s, the Mesoamerican theory appeared even in the Ensign magazine. But the limited geography created an apparent dilemma. A New York Cumorah cannot coexist with a Guatemalan Zarahemla. Book of Mormon scholars had to choose between the two settings. They made their choice. The problem is, they rejected the New York Cumorah in favor of the theoretical sites in Central America. This book is about that specific choice. Here's how the scholars rationalized the decision to accept Central America and reject New York. They decided that the hill in New York was named Cumorah solely because Joseph obtained the plates there, not because it was a hill mentioned in the text. They think the name Cumorah was merely a tradition started by unknown people early in church history, and Joseph Smith passively went along with it. But the, quote, real, close quote, Cumorah, the scene of the final battles of the Jaredites and the Nephites, was somewhere in Central America along with Zarahemla, Bountiful, and other Book of Mormon sites. The anonymous Times and Seasons articles obviously drove this choice. The scholars thought Joseph Smith agreed with the Central American setting. Having made their decision, LDS scholars have spent decades looking in vain for solid evidence of the Book of Mormon in Central America. They have written dozens of papers and books about illusory correspondences between Mayan civilization and what they read in the text, a process they call finding Mesoamerica in the text. One prominent group that includes many LDS scholars and even emeritus general authorities is dedicated, quote, to increase understanding of the Book of Mormon as an ancient Mesoamerican document, close quote. Their influence permeates church literature, art, media, and even lesson manuals. Mesoamerican imagery is imprinted on the minds of anyone who has grown up in the church or been educated by the church educational system. Millions of copies of the Book of Mormon have been published with the Arnold Freiberg paintings depicting Central American locations, all in direct contradiction to Letter VII. End of chapter 1.